You should start announcing the live, especially for YouTube. That helps a lot.
How would you announce it though? It's only a video platform. Would you announce it on Instagram? It's also on Instagram.
Sorry, I'm distracted by trying to adjust the phone. What was the question? Okay.
You could put it in like an intro or an outro. Daily live Q&A.
Yeah, that's true. Okay.
So did you put the title on Instagram?
I did put the title on Instagram. I don't see where that is though.
Oh, it's right on there.
Is it?
Yeah.
Where? Where do you see it?
It says asses and improve hip flexion.
Are you serious? I didn't put assess?
I mean, you did. I don't really know the difference between assess and asses, though.
That could be tricky when you're trying to assess asses.
Yeah. I mean, it could be either way, honestly. Asses and hip flexion.
Oh my gosh. Well, we should get plenty of people.
So it sounds like on IG here, people are getting notifications that we're live on YouTube.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, that's interesting.
That notification gang.
Notification gang.
Well, okay, so the title shows up only in like the first 10 seconds. And then it goes away.
Oh, so when you first get on?
Yeah.
I see.
Right.
Okay, let me, stabilizing. You are in.
Well, as
frame.
Ron is setting up here, guys, we are talking, assessing, and improving overhead position, as well as assessing and improving hip flexion. Those will be our topics. But, as always, happy to field any questions outside of those two topics as well. Which should we start with?
Probably the hip one, I think. You can click the little drop down on IG by the name to display the title after it goes away. Oh, okay. Look at that, we're learning from our viewers. Appreciate it, guys. All right. Now we should be good. Okay. Okay. Ready?
Yep.
All right. I was gonna start the countdown. Still.
Start
Okay.
the countdown.
Yes. All right.
I feel so vulnerable here without somebody on my left or right today.
That's true. There's no one. Okay. 3, 2, 1.
All right, everybody, we're talking assessing and improving your hip flexion. Hip flexion is usually a secondary thought to many people. Most people are going to think about improving hip extension first, which is super important, especially for standing up straight in your squat or locking out your deadlifts or even setting a good global arched position in your bench press. However, more often than not, people have a hip flexion problem than they have a hip extension problem because hip flexion precedes hip extension in loaded movements or in most loaded movements. In the squat, if you're somebody who struggles coming out of the hole or if you really struggle with position, you really need to look at your hip flexion and make sure that that's not a limiting factor. If you're someone who shifts your hips to left or right in a squat or deadlift pattern, you really need to assess your hip flexion and make sure that that's not a massive limiting factor. And it's really easy, and I'm going to show you how to right now. The first self-assessment we're going to do is on the floor here. Really, really important that you keep your lower back into the ground. I don't need you to round your lower back, but we just need to make sure that you're not extending the lower back. What we're going to be looking here for is the differences between left and right legs when the legs are straight and in a flexed position. Knee has to remain straight here. Say, for example, one leg might be here, right? And another leg could be like this. That would be a massive red flag for us because we don't need them to be perfectly equal, but we need them pretty close. So if that was the cause, or if that was something that we noticed when doing this drill, the fix that we're going to have here is by using a band and doing almost like a contract and relax, but it's not, I guess there's not really relaxed phase of this. It's more of like some kind of PNF type stretching, whatever that honestly is, I don't even know. right here, we're getting tension on the band. We're gonna pull up as high as we can. Now, it's super important to note that I'm not stretching here. In fact, I'm just holding the band so it doesn't leave my foot. What I'm gonna try and do is push into as much hip flexion as I possibly can here. I'm gonna hold for a 5 to 8 count. I'm gonna tension this band at this point, and then I'm gonna press it down as hard as I can to the ground and try and extend that hip. I'm gonna hold this for, again, about a 5 to 8 count. I'm squeezing this glute as hard as I can to bring that hip flexor into extension, and then I'm going back. Again, not holding here. I'm trying to get into a bigger degree of hip flexion as far as I can, and then I'm gonna press down as hard as I can here. Now we can do as soon as I finish this, we'll do a left to right assessment to see if I even improve this one over this one, even though I don't really have a hip flexion problem. All right, let's check right leg here. This is about feeling a lot of tension through the hamstring here. And I have pretty equal hip flexion, left to right, and then that's the difference other side. So a little bit of an improvement there, but more often than not, you're going to have a drastic difference from start to finish if you are somebody who struggles with a hip shift, or if you are someone who really kicks into an anterior pelvic tilt at the bottom of the squat. An anterior pelvic tilt is a sign of lack of hip flexion, because instead of your hips continuing to go into deeper flexion, you're essentially stopping it by that pelvic tilt and arching your back to continue to move. Improve your hip flexion, improve your squat, improve your life. Brandon signing out. Well, guys, that's really hard to do by yourself. I haven't done a video by myself in quite a while. Normally I have a number 2 with me that I can talk about positions and things with, but seemed to be all right. Did you notice the difference there, Ron, left to right? I felt it.
At the very end, no.
Okay.
Because the first time, because earlier when you raised your right leg and then you were like, let's say it's like this.
Yeah, that's true.
So,
That's true.
yeah.
Yeah, so there's definitely a difference that I could feel in going back and testing it. I mean, we could even see, I probably still have it. So let's show, just for the viewers here, Ron.
Okay.
Go like right leg, like this is about max for me right here, which this is about all you need. If you are someone who got to this point, you probably don't really need to improve hip flexion. It'd be like somewhere in here. Other one. Feels like a slight difference, but I don't really know.
I couldn't tell again.
Yeah,
I was
well,
too busy trying to keep it in frame.
Well,
yeah.
anyway, guys, if you did have a problem with hip flexion, which I don't feel like I do, you would definitely be able to feel a difference. I would repeat that cycle too, probably 5 to 8 times as it improved, but being really intentional with holding that high flex position and being really intentional about building tension in the band and then pushing into hip extension at the bottom.
We have a question on Instagram. If you feel a lot of hamstring tension during this drill, would you recommend trying to stretch hamstring first before that movement?
Maybe, but your hamstring tension will also probably slowly improve as you progress this exercise. Yeah, I don't know that I would. I don't think it would hurt you, but I don't think you necessarily have to. I think by doing the drill, you'll have a little bit less tension, because it's unlikely that it's like your hamstring's like really short. It could also be that you're just reaching towards like your max elastic position, which also might not be true, since if you do have like a flexion problem, but I would say you can if you have the time to, but it's probably not necessary.
No other questions.
I'll get set up for the next. This one's going to be challenging for me to do. Really going to test out my own
Overhead.
mobility limits. About to get exposed.
Earlier when you were doing it, it looked like you were smiling, but was that?
It was pain.
It was pain. Okay, got it.
Pain. Yep. Well, the next video, guys, similar to the hip flexion one, we're going to talk assessing and improving overhead position, specifically overhead mobility.
Wolves of Vinton in the house. Do you know this reference?
Hmm?
Do you know that reference?
Mhm.
I don't either, but it just showed up on YouTube. Okay. Ready?
Yep.
All right, in 3, 2, 1.
All right, guys, we're talking assessing and improving overhead position here. There's a ton of ways to do it, and there could be a ton of different things that are limiting your overhead efficiency or even mobility. We could have issues that are at like the thoracic spine. We could have issues that are within the scapula and how the scapula tracks up and down. But what we're going to talk about today is more of a global improvement to overhead positioning. And when we say overhead positioning, everybody can get overhead. They can get overhead to some degree in this shoulder flexed position, but it might come at a compensation of excessive spinal extension. If you're someone who has a really locked up thoracic spine and they can't really get overhead super well, they'll still get to end range, but it'll be like through a broken elbow or otherwise. And there are going to be some benefits to having a little bit of extension, especially in like log pressing, axle pressing, maybe even push pressing. But from an overall overhead positional standpoint, we want to train overhead position with a neutral spine. And this is the drill that I'm going to show you today. So the assessment would be anytime you go into excessive extension to get overhead, or if you feel a lot of tension in your anterior shoulder capsule, or if you're somebody who shrugs your shoulders at the top position. Those are all compensations from a lack of end range shoulder flexion. So what we're going to do here is we have a mini band. We're going to tie a knot right in the middle of it. I'd highly recommend using a mini band and nothing heavier for this. And we're going to do kind of a play on our wall angel drill, but it's going to be slightly different and probably more specific to overhead position. So with that knot in the middle, I'm wrapping this around my hands. I'm going to place that knot right in the middle of my shoulder blades, and this is going to be my fix. It's going to be a tactile cue, and it's going to tell me whether or not I'm losing position, because if I lose position, this knot's going to come up and hit me in the back of the head, and I'm kind of scared about that happening right now if I had to be completely honest. So here we go. We're going to place that knot right in the middle of our back, kind of about here. We're going to get our feet slightly away from the wall. If you're someone who had excellent shoulder mobility, you would be able to go feet right to the wall, but it's probably not necessary. For most of us, we're going to start feet away from the wall a little bit. That's going to allow us to maintain a neutral spine through the drill. I'm pinching that band into the wall. I'm going arms straight. I'm putting a lot of pressure into the wall. Now I'm not going to let myself extend or my rib cage flare. Slowly up. And then slowly back. Okay, guys. That was really hard. That's about as hard as it should be when you do it if you have overhead mobility like I do, which is not that bad, but it can still be improved. So by doing this, not only did we give ourselves a very easy self-corrective, because if you did get out of position, you would get whacked in the back of the head. And it'd be a very easy teaching opportunity, kind of like they did in elementary school in the 70s. Bad kid. All right, guys, shoulder mobility, assessing and improving overhead position. Brandon signing out. Oh, that was hard. I probably would have had Brandon or Cassie do 2 reps there too. So I felt like there was more that I wanted to talk about, but it was getting too hard. Now, if you guys had better shoulder mobility than I do, you could use a heavier band. For me though, mini band is plenty. If you had excellent shoulder mobility and you could get overhead perfectly without any changes in spinal position, you could actually use a heavier band to help tension your muscles a little bit better versus just improving mobility, something like a medium band or something like that. That said, guys, I'll hang out for like another minute or two. If we have any questions, be happy to answer them. If not, we'll probably sign out in just a few minutes.
I notice like messages will show up on YouTube, but then they fade out and disappear, and I don't know how to get back to them.
I can look at them on my phone too.
Feels so basic. Yeah, actually, if you could check out the YouTube
Yeah,
one.
all over YouTube.
Because Instagram, I can scroll back.
Yeah, I think this is only our second time trying to go live on YouTube and Instagram at the same point, guys. So we're still learning.
Do you want me to give you one off of here? Off of Instagram?
Sure.
Okay. From Flag75. How much do you guys self-assess and work on these things? Kyle also mentions being tight a lot. So wonder how much you work on these things.
Yeah, all the time. It really depends on your training. So if you are a power lifter, you don't have to have good overhead mobility. It doesn't mean you shouldn't have good overhead mobility. It's just not a prerequisite to being a good power lifter. I would say if any of us coaching-wise is interested in improving an exercise, whether it's overhead press, deadlift, squat, bench, row, we're always going to be doing self-assessments before every single session. The self-assessment doesn't always need to be like a real formal drill either. Once you know what to look for in your movements, and this is something that we teach at all of our seminars, is developing an eye for movement. Once you know the things to look for, you can begin to feel those things and self-assess them as you're warming up. So for example, if I was like really tight, maybe I had a really hard bench press session 2 days ago and I wanted to come in overhead press in the next 2 days or 3 days, and I could feel myself really extending through my warm-ups, I would stop my warm-ups, I'd come over, do a couple drills like this, come back, retest with my actual warm-ups, my actual overhead press position, and if it improved, then it would be good to go. So we're doing these types of self-assessments at every opportunity that we have, because it's really the best type of feedback that you have without actually working with a coach in person.
Nice. From a man in a chair, soon to be a king in a throne. He says he appreciates us doing these, always tries to sign on, learning a lot between these and kabuki.ms.
Right on, right on. Thanks for joining us. Got a question on YouTube here, Ron. Okay. Question was, do you recommend soft tissue work for shoulder mobility issues? Yeah, most definitely. So there's soft tissue work or like stability exercises like I did, which this is like, there's always going to be some carryover between mobilizations and stability. However, if I had really, really bad mobility, like I really couldn't get in position because I had a really flexed thoracic spine, or my end range shoulder flexion was just not having it, I would then go do some soft tissue drills to try to free that up. But the point with soft tissue drills, it's really important to note that the changes that you make are not permanent. They're just going to be very, very acute, like 10, 20-minute changes, where you actually have to go and load those positions if you want to actually learn those positions. Your body only really learns through load, because that sends a sensory stimulus to your brain that says, hey, stabilize joint in this position. When you just free up mobility, you don't actually get that same type of sensory stimulus from that position. So regardless of if you start with a tissue mobilization or a stability drill, you still need to go to load. Load being like not just your warm-ups, but you need to go to loading positions that you can actually get into and maintain significant joint tolerance under ever-increasing load. So yes, you should do tissue mobilizations, but they should only be a small subset of your total strategy for improving positions, because that's really what we're talking about here.
Nice.
It's kind of lonely in here without anyone else to talk to.
Okay, there's no one to bounce off of. Unless you want to talk to me, I guess.
I like talking to you. I feel like you're really focused.
I am, because it's like I'm shooting
in 3
in.
different screens going on.
Yeah.
If you guys could see Ron right now, he's got 2 phones and a camera set up for like producing higher quality content with the camera, 1 phone for YouTube and 1 phone for Instagram. That's show business right there.
Yeah. From Locky Pans. Sorry if I said that wrong. I'm fairly new to the page. How often will these lives be going on? I'm loving the content. Thanks, guys.
We do these lives Monday through Thursday. We do them for about an hour, starting at 1 p.m. Pacific time. I say about 1 p.m. because sometimes we're kind of straggling to get in here, but it's usually between 1 p.m. and 1:15 p.m. Pacific time, and we tend to go to about 1:30. 1:30 would be short. We usually don't do that. I'd say like 1:45 to 2 p.m. Pacific time is, that's where we're at daily. So.
Yeah.
And then if you happen to miss these, that's not the biggest deal in the world. You'll miss out on some of the Q&A. But all the stuff that we film are videos that are actually going to get produced and go on to our actual, the various accounts we have between YouTube and Instagram. So you'll still be able to see the content.
Yep. You got any more stuff over there?
People want to see your setup. Oh, I can request. I don't think I can request to be in the live.
How do you do that? I mean, you could take a picture of me and then show it to the camera.
That's Really?
That's pretty meta.
Okay, we'll do
That's
it.
pretty
We'll do it.
Okay.
All right, guys.
I'll try to look as
We'll show
cool
you
as I
Ron's-
can.
We'll show you Ron's setup here.
I'll kind of look off
This
like
is hilarious.
I know what
gotta
I'm
get in a
doing.
good position.
Okay.
You look really good there.
Do I? Thank
Yeah,
you.
it looks like you're actually like, what was that thing?
Yeah. Yeah. Because I'm missing it. Because I'm.
Yeah. All right, guys. Check this out. Ron's doing his best pose there. Look at that setup. You know that Ron normally has a drink holder on his rig too.
Yep.
I wouldn't say
true.
normally. I'd say it's like, I feel like it's a cool add-on. Look at all those cameras. 1, 2, 3.
Yep. Yep.
Trying to teach the world here. One camera at a time. One social media platform at a time.
Hey, someone just commented on Instagram what I was just talking to you about before we started filming.
What's that?
Said, I hear some knocking sound when I lift leg to my belly. It's kind of like the hip flexion drill that was showed on Kabuki.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that is actually funny because we were just talking about that. So a lot of people when they do like a hollow body hold or even maybe a hip airplane or a dead bug where you're moving limb or even sometimes bird dog, they'll feel a significant clicking feeling or clicking sound in their hip. It's really, I don't know that anybody knows exactly what that is because I think there can be different causes. However, if it's not something that's like a physical, like bony landmark or something running into each other, which very few people are going to have that, that's going to be a sign of a lack of joint centration. And joint centration is like kind of a fancy term, or like a simple, I guess a simpler term for better interostitial contact within the joint. So within a hip joint, you have a kind of a capsule like this, and then you have the femur that goes into that. If that femur is pulled to one side of that capsule or the other, once that femur begins to move and articulate, that's where that clicking is going to come from. So to improve that, you actually have to improve your trunk stability, specifically your spinal position. So if you're on the ground doing that, if you have clicking in your hip, you need to brace a little bit. So you need to generate just a little bit of IAP, press out a little bit, get a little bit tensioned. Doesn't mean just flexing your abs. We need like 360 degrees of tension or inflation here. And that's going to set up that pelvis position to be a lot more friendly on that femur's articulation. So if you do have clicking in your joints like that, it's usually because that even your upper arm bone or your femur is moving to one side of that joint versus the other. So that again, excellent self-assessment. If you have that, something that you really need to pay attention to. I don't think you can necessarily get hurt from that clicking, but it's not something that's super comforting to the brain when you can feel it. And it probably doesn't feel that great either. So brace a little bit, create a little bit of IAP whenever you do those types of drills.
If I may comment.
Yeah.
Specifically to that, see, I thought I was bracing.
Yeah.
But it was actually my right oblique
Mm-hmm.
that I was not focusing on.
Yeah.
Cass found that. So as soon as I became more aware of that, like with the strap drill, and started brace, yeah, and then started doing the brace on that side, then the clicking went away.
Yeah, it's really important, guys, that even if you think you're the best at bracing, almost everybody has an opportunity to improve because bracing and intra-abdominal pressure are not like a static quality that you just have and then you can never lose it. Your ability to create intra-abdominal pressure is very, very reflective of your stress that you're carrying as well. So if you're carrying a lot of stress, maybe either from training or work or just general life stress, that has a massive impact on the way that you breathe. And if you change your breathing patterns due to stress, which everybody does, it's not something that you can control unless you actually physically think about it. But you're likely to kind of extend your chest a little bit, you're likely to take shallower breaths, and that has massive implications on intra-abdominal pressure. So even if you're someone who feels like it's perfect, there's still probably an opportunity because as Ron was just saying, it's very easy too to only have like one side that's inflating super well versus the other side, so you really have to check 360 degrees, including the lumbar spine, to ensure that you have like maximal intra-abdominal pressure generated. And that's something when we talk self-assessments, because we have been talking about that a little bit today, I would say regardless of any of our coaches' issues, every single one of them does a breathing and bracing self-assessment prior to training. I can almost guarantee that. because it's something that's such easy cleanup work, and it has massive implications for the success of that training session. So even if you are, even if you know how to do it, it can be really, really beneficial just to get into a dead bug or a bird dog, hit your positions, drill them, and then go to load after that. I think that's just best practices for better strength training.
Nice.
One question here was, can bracing give hernia? No, bracing cannot give you a hernia. I would say poor bracing under increasing loads can give you a hernia, but physically just bracing and creating intra-abdominal pressure will not give you a hernia. It's only once you introduce load and really poor bracing mechanics is when hernias come in, specifically when people try to suck in or when people just flex their abs. That's when we see cases of hernias happening. So if you're someone who has gotten really comfortable by like sucking in, and maybe you heard through like Pilates or something that you should try and touch your belly button to your spine, that's very likely to give you a hernia over ever increasing loads within your training. Or, and this is not as bad, but it's still a problem, if you're someone who really just relies on flexing your abs for bracing, that's also not a complete strategy. And I wouldn't say it increases the risk for hernia, but we also see people with hernias who tend to brace in those with those types of strategies as well. So bracing and creating intra-abdominal pressure alone will not give you a hernia, but doing them incorrectly under load is most certainly to increase your risk of herniation.
Kind of following into that. When buying a weightlifting belt, how tight of a fit should it be? I'm aiming so that it doesn't limit my brace in IAP.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Let me see if we have any belts in here to show you. We might not have any belts, which is also.
I've got one in my office, but that's it.
Yeah, it's okay. Just gonna put it on and show them. We kind of got organized in here.
I think there's a breath belt.
Yeah, we have a breath belt there. It's not really. Breath belt. All right, I don't see any belts in here. The belt that you use, you should be able to place, like, if you go 2 fingers side by side, you should be able to slide them in while you're relaxed. And then when you create pressure into that belt, you should not be able to take them out. And so that's really like our marker. A belt should not be overly tight. A lot of people will put a belt on and they'll try and go tighter for greater compression, and you will achieve greater compression. However, that compression limits your intra-abdominal pressure creation, because again, remember when we talked about sucking in being really bad for intra-abdominal pressure, if you create a ton of compression over a tight belt and it actually collapses this cavity, you're actually going to generate less active tension, and the tension that you do have is going to be very passive. So when you use a weightlifting belt, or you're looking to purchase a weightlifting belt, you want one that measures out enough where that latches to a position where once you're relaxed, like completely relaxed, belly hanging over, we want 2 fingers to be in between that belt, and then again, once you create pressure into that belt, it should be very challenging to remove those fingers. That's a very easy marker to look for.
You got one over there.
Yeah. Question that we had on YouTube was any other stretches you can do as this person has an anterior tilt or rounding at the bottom of the squat. So you could potentially use stretches, but again, stretches are not going to be the thing that you should stop with. Stretching and doing soft tissue work is going to allow you to get to a better position, but then you need to go load it with stability exercises. So stretches that we could do would be something like a couch stretch, right? If you feel a ton of tension through this position and you can't extend this hip, then you probably need to work on this stretch a little bit. But even then, you don't actually have to get good at this stretch to improve your pelvic tilt. A pelvic tilt under load comes from a loss of stability and potentially poor patterns within your hinging mechanics. A lot of people, when they go to brace and create tension, like at the start of a squat, they go, and then they extend, and say that person still doesn't have great hinge mechanics, they end up extending even further. Your spinal position is going to determine what happens at the hip joint. So it's not that your hip flexor is just overly tight, it's that you don't have a great bracing intra-abdominal pressure or positioning, patterning. You have a patterning type issue. So I wouldn't even recommend stretches as much as I would recommend getting better at bracing, getting better at dead bugs, and doing things like positional reps. And When I instruct positional reps, it's usually like, if you're someone who can squat like 405 or 365, I would use one plate. I would get set, I would get in perfect position, really, really good intra-abdominal pressure. I would squat and I would stop, literally right here. I would stand back up and then I would go back down a little bit more, stop, maintain position. I would hold this probably for a 5 count, back up and then back down, and you kind of get the picture. You'd continue to go down, and the benefits of that is really drilling joint angles that you don't spend that much time in. That's how I would improve pelvic tilt as it relates to barbell training, which is usually what people are referencing when they talk pelvic tilt. So I wouldn't say just stay away from stretches. I would say look to stability drills, look to improve your breathing, look at improving your bracing, because your spinal position is going to determine what happens at the pelvis before anything else affects the pelvis.
I'm guessing back and forth because I got another one here.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I think this is regards what we were talking about earlier. Breathing and bracing assessment you're referring to is the spot checking for inflation or something else?
Yeah, I think, I haven't heard of it called that, but that's generally what we do. So I find that tactile cueing, tactile being like touching, feeling, is the best for improving breathing and bracing. So what we'll do is we'll have somebody go and potentially either lay on the ground in a 90-90 position or sit on the edge of a bench, and we'll have them take their thumbs, put them in their obliques, try to inflate, and they should have equal inflation left to right. We can then check lower abs, same thing, we want equal inflation left to right. We can even, for some people, check at that kind of right at the top of their rib cage, right where their diaphragm is, and we want them to be able to inflate there. Not a lot of people can do that really well. And then finally, we'll check the lower back, and if you have really mobile shoulders, you have like really good shoulder extension, you can check that yourself, but a lot of people don't. So what you'll have to do is get on the ground and use a strap under your back, like a backpack strap, do a dead bug, hold it in position and try and resist movement there. And those are the best self-assessments. Based on what those tell you, you might choose to do a specific drill or just move on to your training. I have one here too, Ron. Question is, I can't maintain tension on all lifts, at all really heavy lifts. Any tips for that? So the person can't maintain tension throughout the entirety of their movement. So the problem with that is there could be a lot of problems. If it's a squat, looking at your hip flexion is important, but I would also venture to say that if you can't maintain tension the whole time, you probably never created tension properly to begin with, because it's very rare that we see someone create perfect, really, really ideal intra-abdominal pressure and bracing from a position standpoint and then just completely lose it. A lot of people think they have it, but in reality they never really did. And for those individuals, it could be even a very slight extension when they breathe, even potentially starting in a flexed position. Minor changes like that can really magnify themselves once you get a little bit lower in the squat or even at the start position of the deadlift. So if you are somebody who's doing it correctly to begin with, I would really make sure you're actually thinking about it while you squat. So as I'm squatting, I'm thinking about building tension, maintaining position, and making sure that I'm actually getting out of that bottom position effectively. If you did create really, really good intra-abdominal pressure and you braced really well, you need to make sure that you actually have full foot contact in with the ground. Because another thing that we see is when ankle and hip mobility demands increase, we're going to see foot stability challenged maximally. And if you have poor foot stability or even mobility, like your foot doesn't splay really well, you might get into a position where you really roll your feet out or roll your feet in. That's also going to be a cause of losing tension upstream because your body has to course correct for that. So I would look at your feet and make sure that you have full connection to the ground. And then of course look at your breathing and bracing without knowing anything else about the movement or the problem. You want to take like maybe one or two more here on, and then
Yeah, there's no more over here, so okay. If you want to go off
a couple here that I can read. Yeah, Corey, we would have to go over to Duffin's private stash to get his whiskey. He's in another building now. This person says, I have a fairly wide sumo deadlift stance and I can't always keep tension in the posterior chain at the beginning of the lift. What should I do? So if you don't have good tension at the beginning of the lift, we might want to look at your pelvis position relative to your spine. If you are somebody who rounds into position, you won't have any hamstring tension. So if you round your lower back, your hamstring tension will essentially be completely zero. Because when you tilt pelvis this way, you actually bring more slack to the hamstrings versus if you anteriorly tilted, you obviously build tension. Not saying you should anteriorly tilt. We need to make sure you're not rounding your lower back in the start position. We also need to make sure that you're not starting with your hips too low. If you start with your hips too low, you're also not going to feel good tension in your hamstrings. One drill that I really like is sumo RDLs. And it's the same way you would perform them with a conventional stance RDL. You would take your sumo stance. If you have really long arms, I would stand on blocks and I would perform an RDL, really pushing your hips back. A cue that I really like to think about in that position is to think about pushing the hamstrings back. Push the hamstrings back and just work on building tension in an RDL pattern. And I would do that as an assistance exercise for sets of like 6 to 8 and make it like your secondary movement after deadlifting or on a secondary deadlift day. Okay guys, that's about it for us today. We got to cap this sucker at 2 because we actually have real work to do. But we will be back here tomorrow at 1-ish Pacific to do another Q&A. All right guys, thanks for chiming in. See you tomorrow.
Can't reach X. Ah! Okay.
It's kind of a lot.
Yeah, I know, right?
A lot today.
Yeah, especially in between the two.
Yeah, we got like 10 questions come through YouTube.
Yeah.
There was about 12
I'm still
people.
live in here. Yeah. Actually, I'm still live on YouTube. I'm gonna stop.